the centuries roll backward, the empire breathes again. The air here is thick with the scent of rammed earth and bronze, and the light falls golden across a landscape that once commanded the destiny of millions. Behind these walls of packed yellow soil, rising from the Wei River Valley, an empire forged itself from chaos, blood, and an unshakable belief that order could be carved from a world torn apart by war. This is the land of Qin and Han, and we stand now at the very threshold of its story. What stretches before us is a panorama of ancient power. Terracotta figures stand in silent formation, their faces each uniquely shaped from grey clay, traces of crimson and violet pigment still clinging to their armor. Beyond them, the great mound of a buried emperor rises against the horizon, its soil still laced with mercury after more than 2,000 years. Farther still, the roads of empire radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel, connecting garrison walls in the frozen north to canal systems threading through the subtropical south. This is a civilization that did not merely exist. It engineered permanence. We will journey from the very beginning of this world, from the fractured mosaic of 7 warring kingdoms locked in centuries of slaughter across the Yellow River Basin, through the radical transformation that turned a remote western state into the most fearsome military power of its age. We will witness a king named Zheng conquer 6 rival nations and declare himself the first emperor, standardizing the written word, the currency, and the very width of cart axles across a realm stretching from the northern steppe to the southern sea. We will walk through the construction of frontier walls and imperial highways, descend into the underground army guarding a tomb of legendary scale, and then watch as that dynasty collapses in barely 15 years under the weight of its own severity. But the story does not end there. From the ashes of Qin, a former village headman named Liu Bang will rise to found the Han Dynasty, an empire lasting over 4 centuries. We will follow its armies into Central Asia and Korea, ride alongside the diplomat Zhang Qian as he opens the Silk Road through the Gansu corridor into the kingdoms of Fergana and Parthia. We will explore the capital Chang'an, home to nearly 500,000 souls, its market wards alive with merchants from India, Persia, and beyond. We will see scholars preserve the Confucian classics, watch Kai-Lun refine the art of papermaking from bark and hemp, and marvel as Zhang Heng constructs a bronze seismoscope that detects earthquakes hundreds of kilometers away. This journey will take us into the daily lives of farmers working iron plowshares through northern wheat fields, silk weavers producing fabric so fine they traveled the breadth of the known world, and artisans layering over 100 coats of lacquer onto a single ceremonial cup. We will enter tombs where princes lie encased in jade suits sewn with gold wire, their walls painted with banquets and celestial processions. And we will witness the slow unraveling as child emperors fall under the shadow of eunuch factions, as peasant armies wrapped in yellow scarves rise under a prophetic slogan, and as the last Han emperor surrenders his throne in the winter of 220 of the Common Era. What makes this story extraordinary is not simply its scale, but its permanence. The ethnic majority of China still calls itself the Han people. The written characters used today descend directly from Han-era script. The bureaucratic model of governance born in these centuries endured for 2 millennia. Paper, invented here, would eventually reach Baghdad, then Europe, transforming human civilization forever. The Silk Road opened from this valley, created a corridor of exchange that still shapes global commerce. This is not merely a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from the first clashing of bronze swords in the warring states to the enduring legacy written into the identity of over 1 billion people alive today. Every battle, every invention, every quiet moment of daily life will unfold in its proper place. If these complete journeys through ancient civilizations speak to something deep within, please subscribe so that no chapter of the human story passes unseen. Each week, we bring the full arc of a lost world back to life. Now let us begin our journey here in the dust and golden light of the Wei River Valley, where an empire first dared to imagine unity. A vast floodplain stretches beneath a pale winter sky, the yellow river carving its slow, silt-heavy path through the heart of the central plain. For centuries, the Zhou dynasty held this land together through a web of feudal bonds, lords pledging loyalty to a son of heaven whose ritual authority radiated outward from his capital near the Wei River. Bronze bells rang in ancestral temples. Vassals paid tribute. The world for a time held its shape. But by the 5th century before the Common Era, that shape has shattered beyond repair. The Zhou king reigns in name only, confined to a tiny domain around Luoyang, his edicts ignored, his armies non-existent. The feudal order that once bound hundreds of lesser lords to a single throne has fractured into open, permanent war. Across the river valleys and mountain passes of Eastern Asia, rival states devour one another in campaigns of annihilation that will last more than 200 years. The fracture's clearest symbol arrives in 453 before the Common Era, when the ancient state of Qin, once the most powerful domain in the Zhou system, is carved apart by 3 of its own noble families. The houses of Han, Wei, and Zhao divide Qin's territory among themselves, and by 403 before the Common Era, the Zhou king formally recognizes them as independent states. It is an act of surrender disguised as ceremony. The old feudal hierarchy is dead. 7 kingdoms now dominate the landscape. Qi commands the eastern seaboard, its wealth drawn from salt marshes and fisheries along the coast of modern Shandong. Chu sprawls across the subtropical south, controlling the middle Yangtze and its rice-rich tributaries, a kingdom so vast its armies can march for weeks without crossing a border. Yan clings to the cold northern frontier, its capital near modern Beijing, buffering the settled world against steppe nomads. Wei holds the strategic center of the central plain, rich but dangerously exposed on every side. Zhao stretches across the northern highlands, its cavalry traditions shaped by proximity to nomadic horsemen. Han, the smallest of the 7, occupies a narrow corridor of territory squeezed between stronger neighbors. And in the far west, beyond the mountain passes of the Qinling Range, the state of Qin controls the Wei River Valley, isolated, underestimated, and quietly gathering strength. The landscape itself dictates strategy. Rivers serve as highways and barriers. Mountain ranges funnel armies into killing corridors. Walled cities rise from rammed earth, their fortifications growing thicker and taller with each generation of siege warfare. Bronze weapons give way to iron. Chariots, once the decisive arm of battle, yield to massed infantry formations numbering in the tens of thousands. Crossbows appear on battlefields, their bronze trigger mechanisms engineered with lethal precision, capable of piercing armor at distances no archer can match. The scale of violence is staggering. States that lose wars do not merely pay tribute, they cease to exist. Their populations are absorbed, their ruling families extinguished, their cities razed or renamed. Diplomacy becomes an art of survival, alliances shifting season by season as strategists travel between courts offering schemes of vertical and horizontal coalition. The doctrine of Hezong urges weaker states to unite against the strongest. The counter-doctrine of Lianheng counsels alliance with the dominant power. Both strategies produce temporary arrangements and permanent betrayals. Beneath the warfare, a deeper transformation reshapes society. The old aristocratic order crumbles. Merit begins to matter more than birth. States that promote capable administrators and reward effective soldiers gain advantage over those clinging to hereditary privilege. Land tenure shifts. Peasants who once farmed as serfs on noble estates increasingly work plots registered directly by the state, paying taxes in grain and labor. Iron plowshares break heavier soils. Populations grow. The demand for soldiers, farmers, and administrators intensifies. This is a world consuming itself in search of a new order. The Zhou dream of harmony under heaven has become a memory invoked by philosophers and ignored by generals. Somewhere in the western highlands, along the banks of the Wei River, the state of Qin watches and waits. But the wars that consume the central plain are not the only force reshaping this fractured world. Amid the clash of bronze and the burning of cities, something quieter and more enduring takes root. Scholars wander the rutted roads between kingdoms, carrying bundles of bamboo slips bound with cord, seeking audiences with rulers desperate for any advantage. These itinerant thinkers offer something no army can provide, a vision of order itself. The earliest and most influential voice belongs to Kongzi, known to later centuries as Confucius, born around 551 years before the Common Era in the small state of Lu, in what is now Shandong province. A minor official's son, he spends decades traveling from court to court, teaching a philosophy rooted in ritual propriety, filial devotion, and the cultivation of moral character. His vision is conservative in the deepest sense, a longing to restore the harmonious relationships he believes once governed the early Zhou. Virtue, he insists, must flow downward from the ruler. A just king produces a just society. His students record his teachings on narrow strips of bamboo, conversations and aphorisms that will eventually be compiled as the Analerta. Kongzi dies around 479 years before the Common Era, largely unheeded by the princes of his age. Yet his ideas survive and multiply. A century and a half later, Mengzi, Mencius, born around 372 years before the Common Era, carries the Confucian tradition forward with a radical claim. Human nature is inherently good. Benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, and propriety exist as seeds within every person, waiting to be cultivated. Rulers who govern through virtue will attract the loyalty of all under heaven. Those who rule by force will inevitably fall. Not everyone agrees. In the state of Song, the philosopher Mozi, active in the 5th century before the Common Era, rejects Confucian ritual as wasteful extravagance. He preaches universal love without the hierarchical distinctions Confucians hold sacred. His followers, the Mohists, develop sophisticated arguments in logic, optics, and defensive siege engineering, offering their military expertise to small states threatened by larger predators. A different path unfolds in the Taoist tradition attributed to the enigmatic Laozi, whose historical existence remains uncertain, but whose text, the Tao Te Ching, circulates widely by the 4th century before the Common Era. Its 81 brief passages counsel rulers to govern through inaction, to follow the natural way, the Tao, rather than impose artificial order. Zhuangzi, writing in the late 4th century, extends this vision into dazzling parables that question the very nature of knowledge and identity. A butterfly dreaming it is a man, or a man dreaming he is a butterfly, the distinction dissolves. Sunlit courtyards in the state of Qi host the Jixia Academy, perhaps the ancient world's closest equivalent to a university, where thinkers of every persuasion gather under royal patronage to debate and write. Scholars of the yin-yang school map the cosmos through cycles of 5 elemental phases. Logicians of the school of names probe paradoxes of language and category. But the philosophy that will prove most immediately consequential emerges last. Han Feizi, born around 280 years before the Common Era, synthesizes the legalist tradition into a ruthless system of governance. Human nature, he argues, is selfish. Virtue is irrelevant. Only clear laws, strict punishments, and a system of rewards aligned with the state's interests can produce order. The ruler must trust no one, not ministers, not family, not friends. Power depends on technique, position, and the impersonal machinery of law. Han Feizi writes his treatises on wooden tablets in careful brush strokes, each character a weapon aimed at the sentimentality of Confucian idealism. He will eventually travel to the court of Qin, where his ideas find their most receptive audience, and where he will die in a prison cell around 233 years before the Common Era, poisoned at the instigation of his former classmate, the Qin Chancellor Li Si. These competing visions, moral cultivation, universal love, natural harmony, cosmic cycles, and the cold mechanics of state power, do not remain abstract. Every court in the warring states world employs advisors steeped in one tradition or another. Policy decisions on taxation, warfare, diplomacy, and ritual reflect philosophical commitments. The bamboo slips multiply, copied and recopied, carried in ox carts across muddy roads. An entire civilization is arguing about what it means to be human, what government owes its people, and whether order comes from virtue or from force. The answer that prevails will determine the shape of an empire. The answer arrives in the Wei River Valley, carried by a man from the defeated state of Wei. In 361 years before the Common Era, a minor nobleman named Gongsun Yang crosses into Qin territory, passing through a landscape that the Eastern courts regard with open contempt. Qin is a frontier state, its people considered half-barbarous, its aristocracy entangled in blood feuds and hereditary privilege. The Wei River cuts through a broad valley of loess soil, golden brown and fertile, yet underworked. Rammed earth villages cluster along irrigation ditches that have silted over from neglect. The state possesses one decisive advantage: geographic isolation behind mountain passes that shield it from the worst of the Eastern wars. But it lacks the administrative machinery to exploit its position. Gongsun Yang, who will become known to history as Shang Yang, secures the patronage of Duke Xiao of Qin, and in 356, before the Common Era begins implementing reforms of extraordinary severity. The hereditary aristocracy loses its grip overnight. Noble titles, land grants, and political appointments no longer pass from father to son by birthright. Instead, a system of 20 military ranks ties every privilege to battlefield performance. A soldier who delivers one enemy head advances one rank. 2 heads earn land, exemption from corvée labor, and the right to own servants. The message is brutally clear. Valor in war is the only currency that matters. The agricultural landscape transforms in parallel. Families are organized into groups of 5 and 10 households, bound by mutual surveillance and collective punishment. If one member commits a crime and the others fail to report it, the entire group faces identical penalties. Farmers who exceed grain and silk production quotas receive tax exemptions. Those who engage in commerce or fail to cultivate their allotments face enslavement. Shangyang's Qin does not seek prosperous merchants or wandering philosophers. It seeks grain in the granaries and soldiers in the field. Bronze measuring vessels, cast to precise specifications and stamped with official inscriptions, appear across the commanderies. Weights, volumes, and lengths conform to a single standard. Tax collection becomes predictable, military provisioning becomes efficient, and the state's capacity to wage sustained campaigns increases with each harvest cycle. Along the Wei River Valley, new rammed earth fortifications rise, walls of compacted yellow soil layered with reed mats, broad enough for sentries to patrol their tops. The results manifest within a single generation. Qin armies, equipped with mass-produced bronze crossbow triggers of interchangeable parts, begin pushing eastward. Infantry formations armed with crossbows capable of piercing armor at 200 paces replace the chariot-centered warfare of earlier centuries. The old aristocratic warrior culture, where noble lineage determined command, gives way to a meritocratic officer corps hardened by the 20-rank system. Shangyang himself does not survive his own revolution. When Duke Xiao dies in 338 before the Common Era, the new ruler permits the old nobility to exact revenge. Shangyang flees but is captured, reportedly unable to find lodging at an inn because his own laws forbid sheltering a man without proper identification documents. He is executed by chariot dismemberment. Yet the system endures. No subsequent Qin ruler reverses the reforms. The culmination of this military machine arrives at Changping in 260 before the Common Era. Qin General Bai Qi faces the massed armies of the state of Zhao in a campaign that stretches across months of maneuvering through narrow mountain valleys. When the Zhao forces finally surrender after being encircled and starved, Bai Qi orders the execution of the prisoners. Ancient sources record the number at 400,000. Even accounting for exaggeration, the scale is catastrophic. The mass graves discovered by modern archaeology in the Changping region contain layer upon layer of skeletal remains bearing weapon trauma. After Changping, no single eastern state possesses the military strength to resist Qin alone. The Wei River Valley, once dismissed as a barbarian periphery, now commands the most disciplined army, the deepest granaries, and the most ruthlessly efficient bureaucracy in the known world. The philosophical debate about whether order comes from virtue or from force has received its first decisive answer, written not in ink on bamboo slips, but in blood across the killing fields of northern China. In the year 259 before the Common Era, in the Zhao capital of Handan, a boy is born into captivity. His father, Yiren, is a minor Qin prince held as a political hostage, one of dozens of expendable royals scattered across enemy courts as guarantees of fragile truces. The child's name is Zheng. His earliest years unfold not in the palaces of the Wei River Valley, but within the walls of a hostile city, surrounded by the language and customs of the very kingdom Qin will one day annihilate. The boy's fortunes turn through the machinations of a wealthy merchant named Lu Buwei, who recognizes in the obscure hostage prince an investment of extraordinary potential. Lu Buwei lavishes gifts on Yiren, engineers his escape back to Qin, and maneuvers him into position as heir to the throne. When Yiren ascends as King Zhuangxiang in 250 before the Common Era and dies just 3 years later, the 13-year-old Zheng inherits the most powerful state in the known world. Lu Buwei serves as chancellor and regent, governing in the young king's name. The capital Jianyang sprawls along the northern bank of the Wei River, a city of rammed earth walls and tiered palace platforms rising above the floodplain. Government offices hum with the bureaucratic machinery perfected over a century of legalist reform. Granaries hold surplus from millions of registered farming households. Armories stock tens of thousands of bronze crossbow triggers, each manufactured to interchangeable specifications. As Zheng matures, he moves decisively to consolidate personal authority. In 238 before the Common Era, he survives a coup attempt by Lao Ai, a court favorite of the Queen Dowager who has raised a private army. Zheng crushes the rebellion, executes Lao Ai's followers, and within 2 years strips Lu Buwei of all titles. The former chancellor, exiled to Sichuan, takes his own life by poison. By 235 before the Common Era, no intermediary stands between the young king and absolute power. The conquest begins methodically. In 230 before the Common Era, Qin armies cross into the state of Han, the smallest and weakest of the remaining 6 kingdoms, and annex it without prolonged resistance. The following year, Qin turns north against Zhao, the old enemy humiliated at Changping a generation earlier. Zhao's capital Handan, the city of Zheng's own birth, falls in 228 before the Common Era after a campaign compounded by earthquake and famine within Zhao's borders. Wei collapses in 225 before the Common Era when Qin engineers divert the Yellow River to flood its capital Daliang. The walls dissolve into mud. The king of Wei surrenders. Chu presents the greatest challenge. Stretching across the Yangtze Basin, Chu commands vast territory and deep reserves of manpower. The veteran general Wang Jian advises the king that nothing less than 600,000 troops will suffice. Zheng initially entrusts the campaign to a younger, more aggressive commander, Li Xin, who advances with 200,000 soldiers and suffers a devastating defeat. Humbled, Zheng recalls Wang Jian from retirement and grants him the full 600,000. Wang Jian marches south, camps for over a year to exhaust Chu's resources, then strikes decisively. Chu falls in 223 before the Common Era. Yan in the far northeast has already attempted a desperate counter-strike, the failed assassination mission of Jing Ke, who approached the Qin king with a poisoned dagger concealed in a map scroll in 227 before the Common Era. The blade missed. Yan's remaining forces are swept aside by 222 before the Common Era. Qi, the last independent kingdom, has maintained neutrality throughout the decade of conquest, its diplomats persuaded by Qin agents that cooperation guarantees survival. When Qin armies finally march east in 221 before the Common Era, Qi surrenders without battle. In a single decade, the map of a fractured world has been erased. The 7 kingdoms that warred for 2.5 centuries are gone. Xianyang now governs everything from the Ordo steppe to the southern coast. The king who was born a hostage in an enemy city commands a domain of unprecedented scale. He will need a new title, one that no ruler in history has ever claimed. He chooses the title Huangdi, a word that fuses the ancient terms for the 3 sovereigns and the 5 emperors into a single, unprecedented designation. No king has ever claimed it. He is Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, and the title announces that everything before him is prologue. The capital Jianyang sprawls along the northern bank of the Wei River, its rammed earth palace platforms rising above a city swollen with administrators, soldiers, and conscript laborers. From this seat of power, in the year 221 before the Common Era, a series of decrees radiates outward that will reshape every corner of the conquered lands. The empire is divided into 36 commanderies, each governed by a civil administrator, a military commander, and an imperial inspector. 3 officials who watch one another as much as they govern the population. The feudal order that defined the Zhou world for 8 centuries is abolished in a single administrative stroke. No kings, no hereditary lords, only appointed officials answerable to the throne. The most visible transformation begins with writing itself. Across the former kingdoms, regional scripts had diverged into mutually illegible forms. Qin scribes now impose the small seal script as the sole legal writing system. Stone steles erected at sacred mountains and coastal promontories carry the emperor's proclamations in these elegant, standardized characters. Every legal document, tax record, and military order must conform. A civilization that could not read itself is forced into a single written language. Currency follows. The diverse coins of the vanquished states, knife money from Qi, spade money from Zhao and Wei, are melted down and recast as circular bronze banliang coins, each weighing half a liang, each pierced with a square center hole, the round heaven enclosing the square earth. Weights and measures undergo identical standardization. Bronze vessels inscribed with imperial decrees establish exact volumes for grain taxation across every commandery. Even axle widths are fixed by law, so that cartwheels carve uniform ruts into the roads of the empire. Those roads are themselves an engineering marvel. The Qidao, imperial highways, extend outward from Xianyang in straight lines that ignore terrain with breathtaking arrogance. 50 paces wide, flanked by trees planted at precise intervals, their compacted surfaces carry troops, officials, and the emperor's own inspection tours across distances that once required crossing hostile borders. In the south, where the empire pushes into the subtropical lands of the Bayou peoples, engineers construct the Link Canal to link the Xiang River flowing north into the Yangtze with the Li River flowing south into the Pearl River system. This single waterway connects the 2 great drainage basins of the empire, allowing grain and soldiers to move between central China and the far south. Along the northern frontier, a different kind of construction unfolds. General Meng Tian commands 300,000 troops stationed beyond the Ordos Loop, driving the Xiongnu nomads northward across the steppe. Existing walls built by the former states of Qin, Zhao, and Yan are linked and extended into a continuous barrier of rammed earth and stone stretching across mountains and desert margins. Watchtowers rise at intervals, their beacon fires capable of relaying warnings across hundreds of li in a single night. yet the same imperial will that unifies also destroys. In 213 before the Common Era, Chancellor Li Si persuades the emperor that private collections of historical texts foster dangerous comparisons between past and present governance. The order goes out. All texts outside the imperial library that are not of Qin origin, and all works of philosophy except those of the legalist school, are to be burned. Copies of the Book of Songs, the Book of Documents, and the records of the 100 schools feed provincial bonfires. The following year, 460 scholars accused of criticizing the regime are buried alive in pits outside Xianyang. Construction of the Epang Palace begins south of the Wei River, its front hall designed to seat 10,000. Across the empire, the labor demands are staggering. Hundreds of thousands of conscripts build walls, roads, canals, and palaces simultaneously. And beneath Mount Li, east of Xianyang, a project of even greater ambition takes shape in secret. A tomb complex of such scale that it will not be fully understood for more than 2,000 years. The tomb complex beneath Mount Li is the greatest construction project of the ancient world. From the moment Ying ascends the Qin throne at age 13 in 246 before the Common Era, work begins on his final resting place. It will continue without pause for 38 years, consuming the labor of an estimated 700,000 workers, convicts, conscripts, and artisans drawn from every corner of the empire. The site sprawls across 56 square kilometers of rolling terrain east of the capital Xianyang, near the foot of Mount Li, where hot springs seep from limestone. At its center, a massive burial mound of rammed earth rises 76 meters above the surrounding plain, its four sides oriented precisely to the cardinal directions. Outer and inner walls of pounded earth enclose the mound in concentric rectangles, their gates flanked by watchtowers, mimicking the layout of an imperial palace city designed to serve the emperor in death as Xianyang serves him in life. But the most astonishing feature lies 1.5 kilometers east of the burial mound, hidden beneath the surface of agricultural fields, where local farmers will unknowingly plant pomegranates and persimmons for centuries. 3 enormous underground pits, excavated to depths of 5 meters and roofed with timber beams and woven mats sealed beneath layers of earth, contain an army built entirely of fired clay. Pit 1 is the largest, a rectangular formation stretching 230 meters in length and 62 meters in width. Within it stand more than 6,000 terracotta infantry figures arranged in precise battle order. Vanguard rows of unarmored crossbowmen face east, followed by columns of armored soldiers carrying bronze spears, halberds, and swords. Each figure stands between 175 and 197 centimeters tall. Their faces are individually modeled, high cheekbones beside broad jaws, thin lips beside full ones, young faces beside weathered ones, assembled from molds but finished by hand so that no two are identical. Traces of original polychrome paint cling to the gray clay. Vermilion lips, black hair, green and purple armor lacings, pink flesh tones rendered in pigments bound with animal glue. Pit 2 to the northeast holds a more complex tactical formation. Kneeling crossbowmen, standing archers, cavalry units with saddled terracotta horses, and war chariots with 4-horse teams. Pit 3, the smallest, contains 68 figures arranged in a command post configuration, their positioning suggesting the headquarters of a general staff. The weapons these figures carry are real: bronze swords, crossbow triggers, and arrowheads number in the tens of thousands. Analysis reveals that the bronze blades bear a surface treatment of chromium oxide, a corrosion-resistant coating that keeps them sharp and bright after more than 2 millennia underground. The crossbow triggers are manufactured with such precision that their interchangeable parts fit mechanisms across the entire army, evidence of standardized mass production on an industrial scale. Elsewhere in the complex, 2 half-scale bronze chariots discovered in 1980 lie in a wooden coffin west of the burial mound. Each chariot is drawn by 4 bronze horses with gold and silver harness fittings, their reins threaded through the driver's fingers with astonishing anatomical accuracy. The painted canopy of the second chariot, an enclosed carriage, retains its original cloud pattern designs in white, blue, and green. The central tomb chamber itself remains unexcavated. But the historian Sima Qian, writing a century after the burial, describes an underground palace with a ceiling set with pearls to represent the stars, and a floor where rivers and seas of liquid mercury flow by mechanical means. Modern geochemical surveys of the burial mound confirm abnormally high concentrations of mercury in the soil directly above the sealed chamber, lending extraordinary credibility to an account once dismissed as legend. The entire complex functions as a mirror of the empire itself, its armies, its palaces, its rivers, its heavens, compressed into earth and bronze and clay, intended to accompany the first emperor into an eternity he believed he could govern as absolutely as he governed the living world. But eternity, it turns out, lasts only a few months beyond the final breath. In the summer of 210 before the Common Era, the first emperor dies aboard his traveling carriage during a 5th imperial inspection tour, somewhere along the sandy coast east of modern Hebei. The cause is unknown. Illness, mercury poisoning from the elixirs of immortality he has consumed for years, or simple exhaustion after 2 decades of relentless governance. The body begins to decay in the summer heat, and the most powerful man in the known world becomes, in an instant, a political crisis concealed inside a curtained wagon. Only 3 men know the truth: the eunuch Zhao Gao, the Chancellor Li Si, and the emperor's youngest son Hu Hai travel alongside the corpse as the procession continues westward toward Xianyang. Cartloads of salted fish are positioned near the imperial carriage to mask the smell of decomposition. Meals are delivered to the sealed wagon at regular intervals. Memorials from provincial officials are collected and answered as though the emperor still reads them. The empire, stretching from the Ordo's steppe to the South China Sea, functions on the fiction that its creator still lives. Within the curtained darkness of that deception, Zhao Gao acts. The first emperor's sealed edict naming Crown Prince Fusu as successor is intercepted and destroyed. A forged letter, bearing the imperial seal, is dispatched northward to the frontier, where Fusu serves alongside General Meng Tian and 300,000 troops guarding the northern walls. The letter accuses both men of disloyalty and commands them to take their own lives. Fusu, a Confucian-leaning prince known for his filial obedience, complies without resistance. Meng Tian hesitates but is imprisoned and eventually forced to swallow poison. The empire's most capable heir and its most experienced general are eliminated by a single sheet of forged silk. Hu Hai ascends the throne as Qin Shi, the second emperor, a young man of 21 with no administrative experience and no inclination toward governance. Zhao Gao becomes his sole advisor, systematically eliminating rivals. Chancellor Li Si, the architect of unification's legal framework, is arrested on fabricated charges of treason, subjected to the 5 punishments, and executed in 208 before the Common Era. The bureaucratic machinery that held 36 commanderies in disciplined order begins grinding against itself. The empire's subjects, already strained beyond endurance by decades of conscription, forced labor on walls and roads and tombs, and punishments that annihilate entire families for a single infraction, reach their breaking point. In the 7th month of 209 before the Common Era, 900 conscripts marching toward garrison duty at Yuyang are delayed by torrential rains near Zhexiang in modern Anhui province. Under Qin law, late arrival at a military posting carries the death penalty regardless of cause. 2 minor officers among them, Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, calculate that rebellion offers better odds than obedience. They rally the conscripts with improvised weapons, farming tools, and sharpened bamboo poles. The uprising spreads with astonishing speed. Across the former territories of Chu, Qi, Zhao, and Yan, local leaders who remember their kingdom's independence raise armies under old royal banners. The Qin garrison system, designed to suppress isolated dissent, cannot contain simultaneous revolts erupting across thousands of kilometers. From the old Chu aristocracy emerges Xiang Yu, a young commander of extraordinary physical strength and tactical brilliance, who annihilates a major Qin army at the Battle of Julu in 207 before the Common Era. From the town of Pei in former Chu territory rises Liu Bang, a middle-aged village headman of no noble birth, who leads a smaller but shrewder force westward towards the capital. Zhao Gao, sensing the dynasty's collapse, forces the second emperor to commit suicide in the autumn of 207. He installs Ying, a nephew of the imperial family, as a diminished king rather than emperor. Ying's first act is to assassinate Zhao Gao. His second, 46 days later, is to surrender. In the 10th month of 206 before the Common Era, Ying kneels before Liu Bang's advancing army at the Jiuan Gate of Xianyang, the imperial seal and credentials presented on a cord around his neck. The dynasty that unified a civilization endures barely 15 years. The palaces still smell of fresh lacquer. The lacquer is still fresh, but the peace does not hold. Within weeks of Ying's surrender, the man who truly commands the rebellion arrives. Xiang Yu marches into the Wei River Valley at the head of 400,000 troops, and the earth trembles beneath them. He is 26 years old, a descendant of Chu's hereditary generals, a warrior of legendary physical strength who once lifted a bronze cauldron above his head. He finds Liu Bang already installed in the Qin palaces and regards this as an unforgivable presumption. At the feast at Hong Gate in the winter of 206 before the Common Era, Liu Bang enters Xiang Yu's camp to explain himself. The tension is murderous. Xiang Yu's advisor Fan Zheng has urged assassination, and a swordsman performs a ritual dance meant to provide cover for the killing blow. But Xiang Yu hesitates. Liu Bang's ally Xiang Bo shields the guest, and the commoner slips away through a latrine exit, escaping on horseback into the darkness. It is the narrowest of survivals, and it will determine the shape of an empire. Xiang Yu then does what no conqueror before him has done to a capital of this magnitude. He puts Xianyang to the torch. The Qin palaces burn for 3 months. The archives, the administrative records, the libraries that survived the book burnings, all of it consumed. He executes Ying and massacres the surrendered Qin garrison. Then, rather than claiming the imperial title, he distributes the conquered territory among 18 regional kings, naming himself Hegemon King of Western Chu and establishing his capital at Pengcheng in the eastern lowlands. Liu Bang receives the remote Hanzhong Basin, sealed behind the Qinling Mountains, a deliberate exile. But Liu Bang possesses what Xiang Yu lacks: patience, cunning, and the willingness to delegate. From Hanzhong, he appoints Han Xin, a former deserter from Xiang Yu's army, as his commanding general. Han Xin devises a strategy of breathtaking audacity. While a decoy force repairs the burned plank roads through the Qinling passes, drawing Xiang Yu's attention, the main army crosses the mountains by a hidden route and seizes the Guanzhong Plain in the autumn of 206. The granaries of the old Qin heartland now feed Liu Bang's war. The conflict that follows spans 4 years of shifting alliances and devastating battles across the central plain. Xiang Yu is the superior battlefield commander. At Pengcheng in 205, he routs Liu Bang's coalition of 560,000 with just 30,000 cavalry in a single dawn assault. Liu Bang flees so desperately that he pushes his own children from his chariot to lighten the load. Yet each time Xiang Yu wins a battle, his political position erodes. His cruelty alienates subordinates. His refusal to share conquered lands drives kings to defect. Liu Bang builds a coalition. Peng Yue harasses Chu supply lines across the Yellow River floodplain. Ying, once Xiang Yu's most trusted general, defects to the Han cause. Han Xin conquers the northern kingdoms one by one, Zhao, Yan, Qi, assembling an enormous pincer around Chu territory. By 203, the two exhausted sides agree to a truce along the Hong Canal, dividing the empire east and west. Liu Bang breaks the truce almost immediately. His advisors argue that Xiang Yu's forces are depleted and dispersed, and this moment will not return. The Han armies converge from every direction on Xiang Yu's remaining forces. At Gaixia, in the winter of 202 before the Common Era, the trap closes. Han Xin commands the encirclement. In the night, Liu Bang orders his soldiers to sing the folk songs of Chu from every side of the camp. The sound drifts across the frozen fields. Inside the besieged perimeter, Xiang Yu's men hear the melodies of their homeland coming from the enemy lines and believe that Chu has already fallen entirely. Morale collapses. Xiang Yu breaks through the encirclement with 800 horsemen. By dawn, only 28 remain. Pursued to the banks of the Wu River, where a ferryman offers passage back to his homeland east of the Yangtze, the hegemon king refuses. He has led 8,000 sons of Chu across that river years before. None survive. He dismounts and dies by his own sword at the water's edge. He is 30 years old. The civil war ends where the great river meets the marshlands, and the empire belongs to a man who once collected taxes in a village. In the second month of the year 202 before the Common Era, Liu Bang accepts the imperial title at Dingtao, on the banks of the Xi River. He is 51 years old. His hands still carry the roughness of a man who once supervised corvée laborers in a provincial township. The dynasty he founds will bear the name of his wartime fief, Han, and it will endure for more than 4 centuries. The first question is where to place the capital. Liu Bang initially considers Luoyang, centrally located and rich in symbolic resonance. but a persuasive argument reaches him from Zheng Liang, his most trusted strategist. The Wei River Valley offers what Luoyang cannot: natural fortress geography. Mountains guard the south, the Yellow River bends protectively to the east, and the fertile Guanzhong Plain can feed 1,000,000. Liu Bang moves his court westward, settling on the south bank of the Wei River, just across from the ashes of Xianyang. The new capital takes the name Chang'an, Eternal Peace. Construction begins immediately on the Weiyang Palace, which will become the administrative heart of the empire for 2 centuries. Its front hall stretches 200 meters in length, raised on a rammed earth platform that dominates the surrounding plain. The palace complex eventually encompasses 43 halls and pavilions within walls running nearly 11 kilometers in circumference. The scale is deliberate. A dynasty born from peasant rebellion must project permanence. Yet the empire Liu Bang inherits is not truly unified. To secure victory over Jiang Yu, he promised kingdoms to his most powerful generals. Han Xin receives Chu, Peng Yue governs Liang, Ying holds Huainan. In total, 7 non-Liu kings control vast territories across the eastern half of the empire. This is the fundamental contradiction of the early Han, a centralized Qin-style bureaucracy of commanderies and counties governing the western core, layered alongside a restored feudal patchwork in the east. Liu Bang spends the remaining years of his reign dismantling this arrangement. One by one, the meritorious kings fall. Han Xin is stripped of Chu in 196 before the Common Era. Peng Yue is executed the same year. Ying rebels and is hunted down. By the time of Liu Bang's death, nearly every non-Liu kingdom has been replaced by a Liu family member. The White Horse Covenant seals this principle. Only those bearing the Liu surname may hold the title of king. The northern frontier presents a different crisis entirely. In the winter of 200 before the Common Era, Liu Bang personally leads a campaign against the Xiongnu Confederation under their supreme leader, Modu Chanyu. At Baideng, near modern Datong, the emperor advances too quickly with a cavalry vanguard and finds himself encircled on a frozen hilltop for 7 days. The Xiongnu horsemen number perhaps 300,000. Escape comes only through diplomatic maneuvering. Gifts and negotiations secure a withdrawal. The humiliation reshapes Han foreign policy for generations. The Hekin system begins. Han princesses are sent north as brides for the Chanyu, accompanied by annual tribute of silk, grain, and wine. It is the price of survival along a frontier the young dynasty cannot yet defend. Liu Bang dies in 195 before the Common Era from a crossbow wound sustained during the campaign against Ying. His designated heir, Emperor Huai, is 15 and temperamentally unsuited to power. Real authority passes to Empress Lu, one of the most formidable political figures of the ancient world. For the next 15 years, she governs the empire through her son and then through 2 infant emperors installed after Hui's death in 188 before the Common Era. She places members of the Lu clan in key military and administrative positions, directly violating the White Horse Covenant. She maintains the Hekin peace with the Xiongnu despite a deliberately insulting marriage proposal from Modu Chanyu. The empire's granaries fill. Taxes remain low. The population begins its slow recovery from decades of war. When Empress Lu dies in 180 before the Common Era, senior officials and Liu princes move swiftly. The Lu clan is annihilated in a palace coup led by Chancellor Chen Ping and General Zhou Bo. Every member holding power is executed within days. The throne passes to Liu Heng, a modest prince governing the northern frontier region of Dai, who becomes Emperor Wen. The dynasty survives its first succession crisis through bloodshed, and the Weiyang Palace stands undisturbed above the Wei River plain, its rammed earth foundations settling into the soil of a capital that will grow into one of the largest cities the ancient world has ever known. Emperor Wen arrives at Changjian from the northern frontier with a small retinue, a man accustomed to provincial simplicity rather than palatial grandeur. The Weiyang Palace receives him, but he does not reshape it. The furnishings remain spare. The curtains are undyed. The imperial wardrobe consists of coarse black silk, and for 23 years on the throne, this frugality never wavers. It is not poverty, but philosophy. The governance of Huang Lao, drawing on Taoist principles of restraint, non-interference, and the belief that a ruler governs best by governing least. The land tax drops to 1/15 of the harvest, and then, in 167 before the Common Era, Emperor Wen abolishes it entirely for 13 consecutive years. Granaries that stood empty during the wars of the previous generation begin to fill. Millet accumulates in state storehouses across the commanderies until the strings binding the grain sacks rot from age. Bronze coins pile in treasury vaults until the cords threading them together disintegrate. The empire breathes. Collective punishment, the Qin-era practice of executing a criminal's extended family, is formally abolished. Mutilation penalties, including amputation of the nose and feet, are replaced with beatings and fines. The legal code softens, not from weakness but from calculation. A population recovering from civil war requires incentives to farm, to breed livestock, to remain on the land rather than flee to banditry. Emperor Wen understands that the state's wealth flows upward from the soil, and the soil requires hands. Village markets multiply across the Wei River Valley and the Central Plain. Iron plowshares, now produced in growing quantities at state foundries, replace wooden tools in wealthier districts. Oxen pull heavier loads through deeper furrows. Rice paddies expand southward along the Yangtze tributaries. The population, devastated by decades of warfare, begins its slow climb toward recovery. When Emperor Wen dies in 157 before the Common Era, his son Liu Qi ascends as Emperor Jing and continues the same restrained governance. The land tax is restored but fixed at 1/30 of the harvest, a rate so low it will remain the nominal standard for centuries. Court expenditures stay modest. The military remains defensive. The Hekin marriage alliance with the Xiongnu continues, purchasing peace through silk, grain, and imperial princesses sent north to the steppe. But beneath this calm surface, a structural crisis festers. The feudal kingdoms granted to Liu relatives during Emperor Gaozu's reign have grown powerful. The kingdom of Wu, under Liu Pi, controls copper mines and salt, works that generate wealth rivaling the central treasury. Cao Kuo, Emperor Jing's most trusted advisor, urges the reduction of feudal territories. In 154 before the Common Era, the court issues decrees stripping land from several kingdoms. Liu Pi of Wu responds with open rebellion. 7 kingdoms rise simultaneously: Wu, Chu, Zhao, Jiaoxi, Jiaodong, Sichuan, and Jinan, fielding combined forces that vastly outnumber the imperial garrison. The empire trembles. Emperor Jing, under pressure, executes Cao Kuo in a desperate attempt at appeasement, but the rebels march on regardless. General Zhou Yafu takes command of the imperial response. Rather than meeting the rebel forces head-on, he cuts their supply lines, severing the grain routes feeding the armies of Wu and Chu. Within 3 months, the rebellion collapses. Liu Pi flees south and is killed by the Yue people of Donghai. The remaining rebel kings surrender or die. The aftermath reshapes the empire permanently. Emperor Jing strips the surviving kingdoms of administrative authority. Feudal kings lose the right to appoint their own officials. Central government administrators replace local aristocratic networks. The commandery system, inherited from Qin and initially diluted by Gao Zu's compromises, now extends its reach into every corner of the realm. The feudal kings remain as figureheads, drawing stipends, but wielding no power. By the time Emperor Jing dies in 141 before the Common Era, the treasury overflows. The population has grown to tens of millions. The roads built by Qin carry commerce rather than armies. The granaries of Chang'an hold reserves sufficient for years of famine. The empire has healed itself through 4 decades of deliberate restraint, and the throne passes to a 16-year-old prince named Liu Che, a young man who will become Emperor Wu and transform this quiet, prosperous kingdom into the most expansive empire East Asia has ever seen. The young emperor wastes no time. Liu Che ascends the throne in 141 before the Common Era, with an ambition that dwarfs the cautious philosophies of his father and grandfather. The Weiyang Palace, already the largest palatial complex in the ancient world, begins to expand under his direction. New halls rise along its western perimeter, their timber columns lacquered in deep crimson, their roof tiles glazed in imperial yellow. But the true transformation is not architectural. It is ideological. Within 5 years, the emperor summoned scholars from across the realm to debate the principles by which the state should govern. Among them stands Dong Zhongshu, a Confucian thinker from Guangchuan in modern Hebei, whose memorial to the throne in 136 before the Common Era argues that the 100 schools have fractured the empire's moral coherence. Only Confucianism, Dong Zhongshu insists, can unify law, ritual, education, and cosmic order under a single ethical framework. The emperor agrees. He dismisses the court positions held by scholars of other traditions and elevates the 5 classics: the Book of Changes, the Book of Documents, the Book of Songs, the Book of Rites, and the Spring and Autumn Annals as the foundation of all official learning. Confucianism becomes the orthodoxy of the state, a position it will hold for 2,000 years. In 124 before the Common Era, the Imperial Academy, the Tai Xue, opens its gates near the southern wall of Chang'an. 50 students enroll in the first class, studying under erudites appointed for each of the 5 classics. Within decades, enrollment swells to thousands. Young men from provincial families arrive carrying bamboo slip texts wrapped in cloth, seeking the examinations that will grant them entry into the imperial bureaucracy. Merit, not birth, becomes the stated pathway to power. Yet Emperor Wu is no philosopher king content with scrolls and ritual. The northern frontier demands blood. For generations, the Xiongnu Confederation has extracted tribute from the Han under the humiliating marriage alliance policy. The emperor dismantles this arrangement entirely. Beginning in 129 before the Common Era, he launches a series of massive cavalry offensives into the steppe. General Wei Qing, born to a slave mother in a princely household, leads the first strikes northward from Shanggu and Dai commanderies, raiding Xiongnu encampments along the Ordos Loop. his campaigns between 129 and 119 before the Common Era systematically reclaimed the Hetao region south of the Yellow River's Great Bend. Then comes Huo Kubing, Wei Qing's nephew, barely 20 years old, riding at the head of light cavalry columns that strike deep into Xiongnu territory with devastating speed. In 121 before the Common Era, Huo Kubing crosses the Qilian Mountains and shatters the Xiongnu forces controlling the Gansu corridor, capturing their sacred golden statues and tens of thousands of livestock. In 119 before the Common Era, both generals lead a coordinated assault, Wei Qing from Dingxiang, Huo Kubing from Dai, pushing the Xiongnu Chanyu beyond the Gobi Desert. The steppe falls silent. Huo Kubing dies just 2 years later, at 23, and the emperor builds his tomb in the shape of the Qilian mountains he conquered. The wars are staggeringly expensive. The treasury that Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing so carefully accumulated begins to drain. The emperor's financial minister, Sang Hongyang, responds with sweeping economic reforms. The state seizes monopoly control over salt and iron production, removing these industries from private merchants and placing them under government-appointed officials in commanderies across the empire. A new equitable transport system redistributes surplus grain from wealthy regions to deficit areas, stabilizing prices and generating revenue. The Wuju coin, a standardized bronze currency weighing 5 grains, replaces the chaotic array of regional currencies still circulating from earlier decades. The Jianzhang Palace rises west of Chang'an, its towers visible for miles across the Wei River plain, crowned by a bronze immortal holding a dew-collecting basin toward the heavens. The empire stretches farther than any Chinese state has ever reached, and its emperor gazes westward, where the Gansu corridor now lies open, a narrow passage between mountains and desert, leading toward lands no Han envoy has ever seen. The Gansu corridor stretches like a long breath between 2 silences. To the south, the Qilian mountains rise in walls of snow and granite. To the north, the Gobi extends in sheets of gravel and wind-scoured rock. Between them runs a passage barely 40 kilometers wide in places, a slender thread of irrigable land connecting the heart of the Han Empire to the unknown west. In the year 138 before the Common Era, a palace attendant named Zhang Qian walks into this corridor with a caravan of roughly 100 men and a single Xiongnu guide named Ganfu. His mission from Emperor Wu is precise. Find the Yuezhi, a nomadic people driven westward by the Xiongnu decades earlier, and forge a military alliance to crush the steppe confederation from both sides. He never reaches them, not for 10 years. Somewhere beyond the corridor's western mouth, Xiongnu riders intercept the caravan and deliver Zhang Qian to the Chanyu's court. He is given a wife, fathers children, and lives as a captive on the open grasslands north of the Tian Shan. But he does not abandon the mission. Around 128 before the Common Era, he escapes westward with Ganfu and a handful of survivors, crossing the Pamir highlands into the Fergana Valley, where he encounters settled kingdoms raising powerful horses in irrigated pastures fed by mountain snowmelt. He presses onward to Bactria, the land the Chinese call Daxia, where the Yuezhi have settled along the Oxus River. They have grown comfortable. They decline the alliance. Zhang Qian turns east. He is captured again by the Xiongnu, escapes again, and staggers into Chang'an in 126 before the Common Era, 13 years after his departure. Only he and Ganfu survive, but the intelligence he carries transforms the emperor's understanding of the world. He describes Fergana and its celestial horses, Kangju beyond the Jaxartes, Parthia with its silver coins and walled cities, and even rumors of Shendu, India, where merchants trade cotton and precious stones. He reports seeing bamboo goods and Sichuan cloth in Bactrian markets, evidence of existing southern trade routes the Han court has never controlled. Emperor Wu dispatches Zhang Qian a second time in 119 before the Common Era, now with 300 men and vast herds of cattle and sheep as diplomatic gifts. This mission reaches the Wusun people in the Ili River Valley and sends subordinate envoys to Fergana, Kangju, and the Yuezhi. Formal exchanges begin. Silk moves west. Horses, jade, glass, and grapevines move east. The corridor itself must be secured. Between 121 and 111 before the Common Era, the Han establish 4 commanderies along the Hexi corridor, Wuwei nearest the interior, then Zhangye, Juquan, and finally Dunhuang at the desert's edge. Garrison towers of rammed earth rise every few kilometers, manned by soldiers who signal with smoke by day and fire by night. Wooden slips excavated from these watchtowers record grain rations, patrol schedules, and the passage of merchant caravans heading west. The horses of Fergana become an obsession. Tall, muscular, sweating what appears to be blood through their skin, likely a parasitic condition, they represent a decisive military advantage over the smaller steppe ponies of the Xiongnu. When Fergana refuses to sell its finest stock, Emperor Wu sends General Li Guangli with an army westward in 104 before the Common Era. The first expedition fails catastrophically in the desert. A second, larger force of 60,000 departs in 101 before the Common Era, besieges the capital Ershi, and returns with approximately 3,000 horses. Camel caravans now cross the Taklamakan Desert along its northern and southern rims, passing through oasis kingdoms, Lulan on the salt-crusted shores of Lop-Nur, Khotan where jade is pulled from riverbeds, Kucha where musicians play instruments that will reshape Chinese court music centuries later. The road has no single name yet. It is simply the passage west, a chain of water sources and walled towns connecting 2 ends of the known world. Silk bales stamped with Han workshop marks will eventually reach Roman Syria. Glassware blown in Mediterranean workshops will appear in Chinese tombs. The corridor between the mountains and the desert has become the spine of a continent. But the Silk Road is only one axis of an empire that now reaches in every direction. By the final decade of the 2nd century before the Common Era, Emperor Wu's gaze turns south toward the subtropical kingdom of Nanyue, a realm founded by the renegade Qin general Zhao Tu decades earlier, stretching from modern Guangdong through the river deltas of what is now northern Vietnam. Its capital, Panyu, sits where the Pearl River fans into a maze of channels thick with mangrove and monsoon heat. For years, Nanyue has maintained a careful autonomy, paying nominal tribute while governing its own affairs. When the young king Zhao Xing and his Chinese-born mother show willingness to submit fully to Han authority, the Prime Minister Lu Jia stages a palace coup, murders them both, and installs a defiant successor. Emperor Wu dispatches 2 armies totaling 100,000 troops in the autumn of 111 before the Common Era. One force descends by river from the Link Canal corridor. The other advances along the coast. Panyu falls within months. Nanyue is dissolved into 9 new commanderies, and Han administrative offices rise in the tropical lowlands, where elephants still roam the forest margins. The following year, 110 before the Common Era, Han forces turn against Minyue, the coastal kingdom occupying modern Fujian. Its king, Zhu Yushan, had secretly aided Nanyue's resistance. Rather than endure a prolonged jungle campaign, Han strategists exploit internal divisions. Minyu nobles assassinate their own king and surrender. The population is forcibly relocated inland, and the mountainous coastal territory is absorbed into the imperial framework. To the southwest, the Dian kingdom occupies the high plateau around Lake Dian in modern Yunnan, a land of bronze drum ceremonies and cattle sacrifice. In 109 before the Common Era, Han armies cross the gorges and mist-wrapped passes of the Yunnan Guizhou Plateau. The Dian king submits without prolonged battle. He receives a gold seal. Archaeologists will recover this very seal from a tomb near Kunming in 1956, its inscription reading King of Dian, and his territory becomes Yizhou Commandery. Garrison watchtowers begin to dot the Red Earth highlands. The most distant campaign unfolds on the Korean peninsula. The kingdom of Gojoseon, ruled by King Ugeo from his capital at Wanggeom near modern Pyongyang, has long served as a buffer state and a refuge for Han deserters. When diplomatic envoys are murdered, Emperor Wu launches a two-pronged assault in 109 before the Common Era. A naval force crosses the Bohai Sea, while an army marches overland through Liaodong. The campaign proves difficult. Coordination between the two forces fails, and the siege of Wanggeom drags through winter. Internal betrayal finally ends the resistance. Gojoseon nobles assassinate King Ugeo in 108 before the Common Era. 4 commanderies are established: Lelang, Zhenfan, Lintun, and Xuantu. Lelang near Pyongyang becomes a lasting outpost of Chinese culture, its tombs yielding lacquerware, bronze mirrors, and silk textiles for centuries to come. The empire now spans from the tropical coasts of Vietnam to the frozen rivers of northern Korea, from the Fergana Valley to the East China Sea. Garrison towers of rammed earth and timber stand along thousands of kilometers of frontier. Bamboo strip documents recovered from the desert outpost of Juyan record the daily routines of soldiers stationed at the northwestern limes. Grain rations, watch schedules, reports of distant campfires. The cost is staggering. Decades of warfare have drained the treasury. The salt and iron monopolies, the liquor tax, the property levies on merchants, all feed the insatiable machinery of expansion. Emperor Wu's later years grow shadowed by fiscal crisis, court paranoia, and the catastrophic witchcraft trials of 91 before the Common Era, in which the heir apparent is falsely accused of sorcery and dies in an armed uprising within Chang'an itself. The emperor who built the largest domain East Asia has ever seen issues a rare edict of self-reproach in 89 before the Common Era, acknowledging the suffering his campaigns have caused. He dies 2 years later, in 87 before the Common Era, leaving an empire of approximately 57 million souls and a question that will haunt every successor: whether the cost of greatness can ever be sustained. The question that haunts every successor finds no answer in the decades that follow. The emperors who come after Wu are capable enough, but the throne itself begins to drift from the hands of the Liu clan into the grasp of those who stand closest, the families of imperial consorts. By the reign of Emperor Yuan, who rules from 48 to 33 before the Common Era, the Wang family has already planted its roots deep within the palace. The Empress Ne Wang produces the heir who will become Emperor Zheng, and with that birth, a dynasty's fate tilts irreversibly. Emperor Zheng reigns from 33 to 7 before the Common Era, a monarch more devoted to pleasure than governance. The Wang clan fills the court like water filling a vessel. Wang Feng, Wang Yin, Wang Shang, Wang Gen. One uncle after another serves as regent marshal, commanding the apparatus of state, while the emperor retreats into the inner palace. The pattern is devastating in its simplicity. Each generation of weak emperors strengthens the consort family, and each strengthened consort family produces weaker emperors. Into this architecture of decline steps Wang Mang, nephew of the Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun. He is unlike his extravagant relatives, modest in dress, generous with his wealth, tireless in public service. Confucian scholars praise him as a living sage. He rises through the ranks with patient precision, becoming regent for the child Emperor Ping in one before the Common Era. When Emperor Ping dies in 5 of the Common Era, under circumstances many find suspicious, Wang Mang installs a 2-year-old infant as heir and rules as acting emperor. By the 9th year of the Common Era, he dispenses with pretense entirely. He accepts the abdication of the child sovereign and proclaims a new dynasty, the Qin. The Weiyang Palace, built by Liu Bang's architects nearly 2 centuries earlier, now belongs to a man who is not of the Liu bloodline. Wang Mang envisions nothing less than the restoration of the golden age of the Duke of Zhou. His reforms arrive in torrents. He nationalizes all land, declaring it the property of the state and forbidding its sale. He abolishes private slaveholding. He reforms the currency not once, but 4 times in the span of a decade, flooding markets with knife coins, spade coins, and tortoise-shell tokens of bewildering denominations. Merchants cannot calculate value. Peasants hoard grain rather than accept coins whose worth changes with each edict. The land reform collapses almost immediately. Powerful landowners ignore the decrees. Local officials lack the authority or will to enforce redistribution. Within 3 years, Wang Mang rescinds his own land nationalization, an admission of failure that satisfies no one. The currency chaos deepens poverty rather than alleviating it. Granaries empty. Taxes go uncollected. Then the Yellow River intervenes with a catastrophe no reformer can legislate away. In 11 of the Common Era, the great river shifts its course dramatically, abandoning its northern channel and carving a devastating new path southward across the Shandong Plain. Millions of farmers lose their fields to floodwater and silt. Refugees stream across the central plain in numbers that overwhelm every provincial administration. Famine follows flood with mechanical certainty. From this desperation rise the rebels. In the marshes of southern Shandong, a movement coalesces around desperate peasants who paint their eyebrows red to distinguish themselves in battle. The Red Eyebrows, followers of a quasi-religious leader named Fan Chong. In the Lulin Mountains of modern Hubei, another rebel army gathers under leaders who include members of the distant Liu imperial lineage. By 22 of the Common Era, these forces control vast stretches of territory that Wang Mang's demoralized armies cannot reclaim. The end comes swiftly. In the 10th month of 23 of the Common Era, rebel forces breach the walls of Chang'an. The fighting reaches the Weiyang Palace itself. Wang Mang retreats to the Jiantai Tower within the palace compound, surrounded by his last loyalists. The rebels storm the tower. Wang Mang is killed, his body dismembered, his head sent from garrison to garrison as proof that the Qin Dynasty has perished. He had reigned for 14 years. His grand experiment in archaistic revival lies in ruins alongside the capital, and the empire fragments into chaos once more, awaiting the hand that will gather its shattered pieces. The hand that gathers those shattered pieces belongs to a man who, only 3 years earlier, was tending fields in Nanyang. Liu Chu is a distant descendant of the Han imperial house, but his branch has fallen so far from power that he lives as a commoner, educated in Confucian classics at the capital's imperial academy, yet possessing neither army nor title. The collapse of Wang Mang's regime draws him into rebellion alongside his elder brother Liu Yan, who raises troops among the Nanyang gentry in 22 of the Common Era. Within months, the brothers join the Lulin rebel coalition, and Liu Shu proves himself a commander of extraordinary nerve. The proof comes at Kunyang. In the summer of 23 of the Common Era, Wang Mang dispatches a massive force, ancient sources claim over 400,000 soldiers, to crush the rebel stronghold at Kunyang in modern Henan. Liu Shu commands a garrison of fewer than 10,000. Rather than await the siege, he rides out with 13 cavalry to gather reinforcements from surrounding camps, then leads a strike force of 3,000 directly into the center of the imperial army. The assault shatters Wang Mang's command structure. A sudden storm adds chaos. The great army disintegrates, trampling itself in retreat across the Kun River. Kunyang transforms Liu Shu from a minor rebel officer into a figure of almost mythic stature. Yet the path to the throne wins through grief and patience. His brother Liu Yan is executed by a rival rebel faction that same year. Liu Shu conceals his anguish, submits outwardly, and accepts a commission to pacify the northern provinces. It is a decision of calculated brilliance. Far from the jealous court at Chang'an, he builds an independent power base across Hebei, winning over local strongmen, disbanded soldiers, and Confucian scholars who recognize in him the temperament of a restorer rather than a destroyer. In 25 of the Common Era, Liu Shu declares himself emperor at Hao, south of modern Shijiazhuang, taking the reign title Guangwu, meaning shining and martial. He claims not a new dynasty, but the restoration of Han itself. The legitimacy of the Liu bloodline, however thin, becomes his most powerful weapon. He establishes his capital not at war-ravaged Chang'an, but at Luoyang, farther east along the Luo River, closer to the agricultural heartland and the canal networks that feed it. The reunification takes 12 years. Province by province, warlord by warlord, Guangwu dismantles the patchwork of regional powers that have carved up the empire. The Red Eyebrow rebels, who had sacked Chang'an, surrender in 27 of the Common Era, starving and leaderless. The Sichuan-based regime of Gongsun Shu falls in 36 of the Common Era after a grinding siege of Chengdu. By that year, every province from the northern frontier to the southern coast answers to Luoyang. The new capital rises on a precise grid. The southern palace and the northern palace anchor the city's axis, connected by a covered elevated corridor that allows the emperor to pass between administrative and residential quarters without descending to street level. Rammed earth walls enclose a perimeter of nearly 14 kilometers. Markets, wards, and government offices fill the ordered blocks. Guangwu deliberately scales back the military, reducing garrison forces and demobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, redirecting labor toward repairing dikes, canals, and irrigation channels shattered by decades of war and flood. Confucian scholarship receives imperial patronage once more. The Imperial Academy reopens, its enrollment eventually swelling to over 30,000 students during the Eastern Han. Guangwu governs with a restraint that echoes the early reigns of emperors Wen and Jing: light taxation, cautious foreign policy, and deference to scholarly counsel. A quieter transformation arrives from the West. In 68 of the Common Era, under Guangwu's successor Emperor Ming, tradition records that Buddhist monks reach Luoyang carrying sutras on a white horse. The White Horse Temple rises on the eastern outskirts of the capital, a modest compound of timber and tile housing the first Buddhist scriptures translated into Chinese. It is a small beginning, barely noticed amid the Confucian orthodoxy of the court. Yet it marks the entry of an idea that will reshape the civilization's spiritual landscape for millennia. The Eastern Han has begun, and with it a second flowering rooted not in conquest, but in the patient labor of restoration. But the temples and palaces rest upon something far more fundamental than doctrine or dynasty. Beneath the political architecture of the Eastern Han lies the true foundation of empire, the labor of roughly 90% of the population who never see the painted corridors of Luoyang. Their world is measured not in reigns but in seasons, not in edicts but in rainfall, and the rhythms that govern their days have remained essentially unchanged for generations. Dawn light falls across the North China Plain in the 1st century of the Common Era, illuminating a landscape quilted with fields of winter wheat and foxtail millet stretching to the horizon. The soil here is loess, fine, wind-deposited silt carried from the western deserts over millennia, and it yields generously when properly worked. An ox lumbers forward, dragging an iron mold-board plough that turns the earth in clean, heavy furrows. The blade is cast at a state foundry under the iron monopoly, its shape standardized across provinces, its cutting edge angled to slice through compacted ground with minimal resistance. Behind the plough, a second implement follows, the lo che, a seed drill with multiple tubes that deposits grain at uniform depth and spacing, eliminating the ancient waste of broadcast sowing. This device, refined during the reign of Emperor Wu on the recommendation of agronomist Zhao Guo, transforms planting from improvisation into precision. Zhao Guo's influence persists across these fields in another form. The alternating field system he promoted, the Daitianfa, divides arable land into narrow ridges and furrows that swap positions each year. What was ridge becomes furrow, what was furrow becomes ridge, allowing soil nutrients to recover in rotation. The method demands more labor, but rewards it with sustained yields that keep granaries from emptying during lean years. Further south, the landscape shifts entirely. In the Yangtze Basin and beyond, terraced paddies descend hillsides in stepped mirrors of water, each level fed by channels carved from mountain streams. Rice cultivation here requires elaborate irrigation, bamboo aqueducts, stone-lined ditches, and simple but effective chain pumps operated by foot treadles that lift water from lower channels to higher fields. The grain that emerges after months of flooded cultivation feeds the empire's southern populations and increasingly supplements northern diets through tribute and trade. The agricultural calendar governs everything. Tied to the lunisolar system, it divides the year into 24 solar terms, each marking a precise shift in weather and obligation. Jingzhe, the awakening of insects, signals the start of spring ploughing. Mangzhong, grain in ear, demands immediate planting of summer crops. Shuangjiang, frost's descent, warns that the harvest must be complete. Failure to observe these intervals invites disaster. A week's delay in planting can mean the difference between surplus and famine. Tax obligations bind the farmer to the state as firmly as the calendar binds the farmer to the soil. Payment comes not only in grain, but in silk. Households across the empire owe bolts of raw silk measured to imperial standards, and this textile currency flows into government storehouses where it funds military salaries and diplomatic gifts alike. The connection between mulberry tree and empire is direct and unbreakable. Stone grain mills powered by water wheels grind harvested millet and wheat into flour at riverside installations, their mechanical advantage multiplying the output of human labor many times over. These mills cluster near market towns, where surplus grain enters commerce. Yet most of what the land produces never travels far. The farmstead, a rammed earth compound enclosing living quarters, animal pens, a granary raised on stilts against moisture and vermin, and perhaps a small watchtower for security, constitutes a self-contained world. Ceramic models of exactly these compounds appear in tombs of the period, miniature replicas placed beside the dead to ensure prosperity in the afterlife. They depict courtyards with chickens and pigs, granaries with removable lids, and watchtowers with tiny crossbow slits, a complete agricultural universe rendered in fired clay. This is the empire's true engine. Not the Silk Road caravans, not the cavalry charges against the Xiongnu, but the patient turning of soil, the careful management of water, and the annual negotiation between human ambition and the indifference of weather. Every bolt of silk on a merchant's shelf, every bronze coin in a soldier's hand, every grain of rice on an emperor's table begins here, in the silence of fields at dawn. Those fields feed a hunger that concentrates itself most intensely behind walls. The grain that leaves the countryside on ox-drawn carts enters a world utterly unlike the one that produced it. Chang'an, capital of the Western Han, stands on the south bank of the Wei River as one of the largest cities on earth, its rammed earth walls enclosing a perimeter of 25 7/10 kilometers. Within that circuit, nearly 500,000 people live, work, worship, and die in a density that would not be matched in Europe for more than 1,000 years. The city is not organic, it is administered. The ward system divides the urban interior into walled residential blocks called li, each with gates that open at dawn to the sound of drums and close at dusk under penalty of law. Movement after curfew is forbidden. Watchmen patrol the main avenues, which run in broad, straight lines oriented to the cardinal directions, wide enough for 12 carts to pass abreast. The Weiyang Palace dominates the southwestern quadrant, its front hall rising on a rammed earth platform nearly 200 meters in length, visible from every quarter of the city. This is not merely an administrative center. It is a cosmological statement, the emperor positioned at the axis of heaven and earth. Commerce flows through two regulated market areas, the East Market and the West Market, each enclosed by its own walls and supervised by market officials who enforce standard weights, inspect goods, and collect taxes. Rows of merchant stalls line covered arcades selling everything from Sichuan lacquerware and Shandong silk to iron tools, medicinal herbs, salted fish, and wine. The markets open at midday and close before sunset. Prices are posted. Counterfeit goods are punished. Among the stalls move faces from distant lands. Central Asian merchants with deep-set eyes and heavy wool garments trade jade and horses. Parthian intermediaries offer glassware and coral. Indian traders bring spices and cotton. The Silk Road does not end at the frontier. It terminates here, in these market wards, where the wealth of continents changes hands under the gaze of Han bureaucrats, recording every transaction on bamboo slips. Aristocratic mansions cluster near the palace district, their tiled roofs glazed in grey and green, their interior walls painted with scenes of hunts, banquets, and mythological processions. Courtyards contain ornamental gardens with artificial ponds. Servants number in the hundreds. These households consume conspicuously, their banquets featuring dishes arranged on lacquer trays, wine warmed in bronze vessels, and entertainment provided by acrobats, musicians, and dancers. When the capital shifts eastward to Luoyang under the Eastern Han after 25 of the Common Era, the pattern repeats at comparable scale. Luoyang's twin palace compounds, the Southern Palace and the Northern Palace, stand connected by a covered, elevated corridor spanning the city's central avenue. The Imperial Academy on the southern outskirts houses over 30,000 students by the mid-2nd century. Their studies focused on the 5 classics carved into stone at the academy gates. The city's commercial quarters host the same cosmopolitan mixture, augmented now by Buddhist monks arriving along the trade routes, their foreign doctrines finding first institutional expression at the White Horse Temple beyond the eastern walls. Yet beneath the grandeur, the city breathes with ordinary life. Wine shops line the secondary streets. Butchers hang cuts of pork and dog meat from wooden frames. Fortune-tellers sit at crossroads. Funeral processions wind through the wards with mourners in white hemp garments, the coffin followed by ceramic models of the possessions the dead will need in the world below. Water is drawn from wells shared among neighbors. Waste collects in drainage channels running beneath the packed earth streets. Disease moves through crowded quarters with the same efficiency as commerce. The city is a machine for concentrating human energy, converting agricultural surplus into political power, cultural production, and military capacity. Every bolt of silk woven in a provincial workshop, every ingot of iron smelted at a state foundry, every measure of grain collected as tax eventually flows towards these walls, feeding a population that produces nothing the soil can grow, but everything a civilization requires to remember itself. And what the civilization remembers is shaped by what its hands can make. The surplus that flows into Chang'an and Luoyang does not merely sustain bureaucrats and soldiers. It feeds a vast ecosystem of artisans whose workshops produce objects of such refinement that they will survive in tombs for 2,000 years, emerging into modern light with colors still burning. Silk comes first, because silk is the empire's second currency. In workshops scattered across the eastern provinces, women sit before looms of extraordinary complexity, operating pattern heddles that allow the interlocking of dozens of colored threads into repeating geometric and zoomorphic designs. The fiber itself begins as the cocoon of the Bombyx mori silkworm, boiled to loosen the sericin binding, then unreeled into filaments so fine that a single cocoon yields over 1,000 meters of thread. The finished textiles range from sheer gauze weighing barely 50 grams per square meter to heavy brocades dense with gold-wrapped threads. At Mawangdui, near modern Changsha, the tomb of Lady Dai, sealed around 168 years before the Common Era, yields a painted silk banner over 2 meters long depicting the journey of the soul through underworld, earthly, and heavenly realms. The same burial contains a folded gauze robe weighing 49 grams, light enough to rest on an open palm. These are not anomalies. They represent the standard of production that Han workshops sustain across generations. Farther west in the workshops of Chengdu and Guanghan in Sichuan province, lacquerware production reaches an almost absurd level of specialization. The sap of the Toxicodendron vernicifluum tree is harvested, strained, and applied in thin coats over wooden or hemp cloth cores. Each coat must dry in humid conditions for days before the next is applied. A single drinking cup passes through the hands of more than a dozen specialized artisans: the core maker, the lacquer applier, the gilder, the painter, the polisher, the engraver, accumulating over 100 individual steps before completion. The finished vessels glow in deep crimson and black, their surfaces decorated with swirling cloud scrolls and mythological creatures rendered in lines of breathtaking precision. Inscriptions on some pieces record the names and roles of each craftsman involved, a bureaucratic accounting of beauty. Bronze mirrors carry the cosmos on their backs. The polished front surface reflects the face of the owner, but the reverse bears cast designs of astonishing symbolic density. The so-called TLV mirrors feature geometric patterns resembling those letters, framing a cosmological diagram of the 4 cardinal directions, the 12 earthly branches, and the animals of the celestial sphere. These are not decorative objects alone. They are portable models of the universe, held in the hand. Jade occupies the highest register of material value. At Mancheng, in modern Hebei province, the tombs of Prince Liu Sheng and his consort Du Wan, sealed around 113 years before the Common Era, contain complete burial suits assembled from over 2,000 jade plaques each, sewn together with gold wire totaling 2,498 individual threads. The belief that jade preserves the body from decay drives this extraordinary expenditure of labor and precious material. The suits encase the dead from head to toe, each plaque cut, drilled, and polished to fit the contours of the human form. Beneath this aristocratic splendor, ceramic Ming-Qi models populate every tomb of means. Miniature farmsteads, granaries, watchtowers, pig pens, stoves, and wells accompany the dead into the earth, replicating in fired clay the entire material world the living inhabit. These are not art for contemplation. They are functional objects for the afterlife, mass-produced in regional kilns, yet individually detailed enough to preserve the architectural vocabulary of an entire civilization. Every object carries the empire's logic within it. Standardization married to virtuosity, state control enabling private mastery, beauty serving both the living and the dead in equal measure. And yet the objects that serve the dead serve something larger still, a cosmos whose architecture the living spend centuries trying to map. The Han world does not separate the sacred from the political, the heavenly from the earthly. Every bronze vessel placed on an ancestral altar, every incense burner shaped like a mountain peak with smoke curling through its perforations, every painted ceiling in every sealed tomb participates in a single unified vision of reality, where heaven, earth, and humanity form an interlocking whole. The intellectual architecture of this cosmos takes its most influential form in the writings of Dong Zhongshu, the Confucian scholar whose memorials to Emperor Wu in the 2nd century before the Common Era reshape the relationship between philosophy and power. Dong Zhongshu does not merely advocate Confucian ethics. He weaves them into the fabric of the universe itself, binding the 5 phases, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, to the seasons, the directions, the colors, the organs of the body, and the moral qualities of the ruler. In this synthesis, the emperor is not simply a political figure. He is the pivot between heaven and earth, and his virtue or its absence ripples outward through the natural world. Floods, droughts, and eclipses become cosmic commentary on governance. The mandate of heaven is no longer an abstract inheritance, but a living, responsive force. This cosmological framework finds its most dramatic expression at Mount Tai in 110 years before the Common Era, when Emperor Wu ascends the sacred peak to perform the Feng and Shan sacrifices, rituals so ancient and so rarely conducted that even the court scholars debate their proper form. The Feng ceremony atop the summit addresses heaven. The Shan ceremony at the mountain's base addresses earth. Together they declare the emperor's legitimacy to the cosmos itself, witnessed by the assembled court and recorded for posterity. But the state cult of heaven coexists with older, stranger currents. Across the empire, Taoist traditions flourish in forms far removed from the philosophical quietism of Laozi and Zhuangzi. Popular Taoism in the Han period is a religion of longevity and transcendence. Hermits retreat to mountain caves in the Zhongnan and Kunlun ranges, practicing breath cultivation, dietary abstention from grains, and the ingestion of cinnabar elixirs believed to confer immortality. The Queen Mother of the West, Shiwangmu, presides over this mythology of eternal life. Tomb ceilings and carved stone reliefs across Shandong and Sichuan depict her seated on a dragon and tiger throne, flanked by hares pounding the elixir of immortality, surrounded by winged attendants and auspicious creatures. She is the guardian of the peaches of immortality, and her image proliferates through Han funerary art with an intensity that reveals how deeply the desire for transcendence penetrates every level of society. The funerary banners excavated from Mawangdui illustrate this cosmology in painted silk. The soul of the deceased ascends through layered realms, the underworld below, the earthly sphere in the middle, the heavenly domain above where dragons, celestial gates, and the sun and moon await. Death is not an ending, but a journey, and the tomb is its vehicle. Into this rich spiritual landscape, a new tradition arrives from the West. By 65 years of the Common Era, during the reign of Emperor Ming, historical records note that Prince Liu Ying of Chu observes Buddhist practices alongside Taoist rites. Tradition holds that Emperor Ming, prompted by a dream of a golden figure, dispatches envoys westward who return with 2 monks, Kasyapa Matanga and Dharmaratna, carrying sutras on a white horse. The White Horse Temple at Luoyang, founded around 68 of the Common Era, becomes the first Buddhist monastery on Chinese soil. The new faith enters not as a conqueror, but as a guest, its meditation practices and concepts of karma initially understood through Taoist vocabulary, its monasteries small and its following limited to court circles and foreign merchant communities along the Silk Road. 3 traditions now inhabit the same civilization: Confucian ritual ordering the state, Taoist longing reaching toward the mountains and the stars, Buddhist contemplation arriving on roads built for silk and horses. None yet dominates exclusively. They coexist, overlap and borrow from one another in ways that will shape Chinese spiritual life for the next 2,000 years. The same roads that carry silk and sutras also carry something less visible but equally transformative: the accumulated ingenuity of a civilization that has learned to interrogate the material world with systematic precision. The Han Empire does not merely govern and trade. It tinkers, measures, tests, and records, and the innovations born in its workshops and academies will ripple outward across continents and centuries. In the imperial workshops at Luoyang, around 105 of the Common Era, a eunuch official named Kai Lun presents Emperor He with sheets of a refined writing material. The process itself is not entirely new. Archaeological evidence from Gansu suggests crude hemp fiber paper existed as early as the 2nd century before the Common Era. But Kai Lun's contribution lies in perfecting the method and standardizing production. Tree bark, hemp remnants, old rags, and fish nets are soaked in water, pounded into pulp, spread across a fine mesh screen, and dried in thin sheets. The result is lighter than bamboo strips, cheaper than silk, and smoother than either. Within decades, paper begins displacing older writing surfaces across the bureaucracy. Bamboo bundles that once required a cart to transport a single administrative report give way to rolled sheets a clerk can carry under one arm. The implications for record-keeping, scholarship, and eventually printing are incalculable. 33 years after Kai Lun's presentation, in 138 of the Common Era, a bronze vessel in the Imperial Observatory at Luoyang drops a ball from one of its 8 dragon-headed spouts into the open mouth of a bronze toad below. The device is the seismoscope of Zheng, polymath, astronomer, and court official. No tremor is felt in the capital, and courtiers express skepticism until messengers arrive days later confirming a significant earthquake in Longqi, some 400 miles to the northwest. Zhang Heng's instrument, constructed 6 years earlier in 132, employs an internal pendulum mechanism whose precise engineering remains debated by modern scholars. The same mind has already produced a water-powered armillary sphere that tracks celestial movements, and a mathematical estimate of pi accurate to the first decimal place. Far from the capital, in the salt-producing regions of Sichuan, bamboo pipelines channel natural gas from deep boreholes to evaporation pans, where brine is heated into crystallized salt. The drilling technology reaches depths exceeding 100 meters, using iron drill bits attached to bamboo cables, a percussion drilling method that will not appear in Europe for more than a millennium. The state monopoly on salt and iron, established under Emperor Wu, drives these innovations forward with the relentless logic of fiscal necessity. At government foundries, water-powered bellows, driven by horizontal water wheels connected through a crank and connecting rod mechanism, force air into blast furnaces producing cast iron at temperatures European smiths will not achieve for another 1,000 years. The chain pump, an endless loop of wooden pallets moving through a trough, lifts water from rivers into irrigation channels, multiplying the productive capacity of fields across the Central Plain. On roads and construction sites, the single-wheeled barrow appears, a device so efficient at concentrating a heavy load over one point that it transforms logistics for both agriculture and military supply. The south-pointing chariot, employing a differential gear mechanism to maintain a fixed directional indicator regardless of the vehicle's turning, demonstrates mechanical sophistication of remarkable elegance. In the quiet of scholarly studios, the 9 chapters on the mathematical art takes its compiled form during the 1st century of the Common Era, gathering problems and solutions spanning surveying, taxation, engineering, and trade. It presents methods for calculating areas of fields, volumes of granaries, proportional distribution of goods, and extraction of square and cube roots. Practical mathematics serving the administrative machinery of empire. These innovations do not emerge from a single genius or a single moment. They accumulate across generations of artisans, officials, and scholars working within a system that values practical results and maintains institutional memory through written records. Records now increasingly committed to paper rather than bamboo or silk. The civilization that standardized its script and measurements under the Qin has created the conditions for knowledge to compound, each solution becoming the foundation for the next question asked. But knowledge compounds only so long as the institutions that preserve it remain intact. And in the decades following Emperor He's death in 105 of the Common Era, the machinery of Han governance begins to corrode from within, not through foreign invasion or peasant revolt, but through a structural flaw embedded in the dynasty's own succession. The corridors of Luoyang's northern palace grow quiet in a particular way. The throne room, vast and shadowed beneath coffered ceilings of lacquered timber, contains an emperor who cannot yet walk. Emperor Zheng ascends in 106 of the Common Era at the age of 100 days. He dies before his 1st birthday. The pattern that follows is not an anomaly, but a system failure repeating itself across 7 decades. Boy after boy is placed upon the carved stone dais. Emperor An at age 12, Emperor Shun at age 10, Emperor Chong at age 1, Emperor Ji at age 7, Emperor Huan at age 14. Each child inherits an empire of 50 million souls and understands nothing of its administration. Power flows instead to the women who bore them and the families those women represent. The Empress Dowager, sequestered in the inner palace yet wielding the imperial seal, governs through regency. Her brothers and nephews fill the ministries. The Dou clan dominates after Emperor He's death. The Zheng clan follows, with Empress Dowager Zheng ruling as regent for 16 years with genuine competence, managing flood relief and fiscal restraint until her death in 121. But the Yan clan that succeeds her proves rapacious, and the cycle accelerates. Each consort family building mansions in Luoyang that rival the palace compound in scale, their estates in the provinces swelling with tenant farmers and private retainers. The architecture of these households tells the story. Excavated foundations of Eastern Han elite residences reveal multi-courtyard complexes spanning thousands of square meters, with watchtowers, private granaries, and defensive walls. These are not merely homes, they are autonomous centers of economic and military power growing within the body of the empire like secondary organs competing with the heart. Yet there exists another force within the palace walls. The eunuchs, castrated men who alone may serve in the inner quarters where the emperor sleeps, possess something no consort clan commands: constant physical proximity to the sovereign. They dress the child emperor, carry his seal, whisper in the hours when no minister holds audience. Their quarters in the northern palace become a shadow chancellery. The decisive rupture comes with the Liang clan. Liang Ji, brother of Empress Dowager Liang, serves as regent and general-in-chief from 141 of the Common Era. For 18 years he controls two successive emperors, poisoning the young emperor Ji in 146 after the boy publicly calls him a domineering general. He installs Emperor Huan, expecting continued obedience. But Emperor Huan grows into his authority. In 159, the emperor conspires in secret with 5 eunuchs, led by Shan Bing and Xiao Teng, passing them a message hidden within palace chambers. On a single coordinated night, eunuch-led forces surround the Liang compound. Liang Ji takes his own life. His clan is annihilated, over 300 households arrested, their confiscated wealth totaling 30 million strings of cash. The victory feels like liberation. It is, in truth, a transfer of dysfunction. The 5 eunuchs who saved Emperor Huan receive noble titles and provincial fiefdoms. For the first time in Han history, castrated palace servants hold formal political rank equivalent to the highest aristocracy. They appoint governors, control judicial proceedings, and amass fortunes. The outer court, staffed by Confucian scholars who spent years mastering the 5 classics at the Imperial Academy, watches as men they consider mutilated servants dictate imperial policy. The tension between these two worlds, the eunuch inner court and the scholar outer court, will define the next generation of Han politics. The palace that once housed the administrative genius of Emperors Wen and Wu now contains a government at war with itself, its corridors divided between factions whose hatred runs deeper than any border conflict. The foundation has not cracked from without. The fractures radiate outward from the throne itself. Emperor Huan dies in 168 of the Common Era, and the 12-year-old Emperor Ling ascends the throne under the regency of Empress Dowager Dao. A brief attempt by her father Du Wu and the scholar Chen Fan to purge the eunuch faction fails within months. The eunuchs mobilize palace guards, execute both men, and consolidate power more completely than before. In 169, the second partisan prohibition falls. This time, the scope is staggering. Over 1,000 officials, students, and their associates are permanently banned from government service. Entire families are blacklisted. The prohibition extends to the next generation, barring sons and disciples from examination and appointment. The Imperial Academy, which under Emperor Wu had educated 30,000 students, becomes a hollow institution. Its stone courtyards still stand. In 175, the scholar Cai Yong supervises the carving of the Confucian Five Classics onto 46 stone tablets erected at the academy gates, the Ziping stone classics, as if preserving in stone what can no longer be preserved in governance. Scholars travel from across the empire to make rubbings of these texts. The tablets become monuments to a tradition that the state simultaneously venerates and silences. Emperor Ling, growing into adulthood, shows no inclination to restore balance. He openly sells official positions, establishing a price list. A provincial governorship costs 20 million cash, a county magistracy 2 million. The revenue funds palace renovations and imperial amusements. Appointments go to the highest bidder regardless of qualification. The bureaucratic meritocracy that the Han spent centuries constructing is dismantled in a single reign. Beyond the capital, the consequences multiply. Provincial officials, purchased rather than earned, extract taxes with neither competence nor restraint. Floods along the Yellow River displace farming communities already strained by corvée labor demands. Locusts devastate harvests in the eastern provinces. Epidemics sweep through crowded settlements. The population, which peaked near 60 million, begins contracting. In the villages, itinerant healers and religious teachers find audiences that the government has abandoned. A Taoist faith healer named Zhang Jue moves through the countryside of Hebei and Henan, offering spiritual cures and organizing followers into a structure that mirrors the administrative districts the empire can no longer govern. The silenced scholars watch from their estates and provincial retreats. Banned from office, stripped of political voice, they correspond privately, preserve texts, and wait. The empire they were trained to serve has declared their service a crime. The academies stand quiet. The stone classics endure sun and rain. And in the fields beyond every city wall, a population that has never read a single classic grows hungrier, sicker, and more desperate with each passing season. In the second month of 184 of the Common Era, the sky over the central plain seems to change color. Across Hebei, Henan, Shandong, and beyond, hundreds of thousands of men and women bind yellow scarves around their heads and rise in coordinated fury against an empire that has forgotten them. Zhang Jue, the faith healer who spent a decade building his network in the countryside, has organized his followers into 36 districts. Large districts of 10,000 or more, small ones of 6,000 or 7,000, each with its own commander, each awaiting a single signal. The slogan that passes from village to village carries the force of prophecy. The blue heaven is dead, the yellow heaven shall rise. The Jiazi year has come, and the world shall be blessed. The plan originally calls for a simultaneous uprising coordinated with sympathizers inside Luoyang itself. But a disciple named Tang Zhou betrays the conspiracy to the court weeks before the appointed date, and Zhang Jue is forced to launch the rebellion ahead of schedule. The premature start costs the movement its element of surprise within the capital, yet across the provinces the effect is devastating. Government granaries burn, county offices fall, local magistrates flee or die. The smoke of burning administrative buildings rises across the flatlands of the North China Plain like a new weather system. The court in Luoyang, paralyzed for years by eunuch politics, lurches into emergency action. The partisan prohibitions are abolished overnight. The same scholars banned from office for nearly 2 decades are suddenly needed. Emperor Ying issues decrees permitting regional officials and local strongmen to raise their own armies. It is a decision born of desperation, and it will prove more destructive than the rebellion itself. From the northeastern frontier, a young officer named Cao Cao leads volunteer forces against the rebels. Yuan Shao, scion of the most powerful consort clan in the empire, marshals his own troops. In the south, Sun Jian of Wu Commandery fights with ferocious efficiency. A distant member of the imperial Liu clan, named Liu Bei, gathers a small band of followers and joins the campaign. Zhang Jue dies of illness in the autumn of 184, and his brothers Zhang Bao and Zhang Liang fall in battle shortly after. Within a year, the main Yellow Turban forces are broken. But the rebellion does not truly end. Splinter groups persist for years across the provinces, and the fundamental conditions that created the uprising, famine, displacement, collapsed local governance, remain unchanged. More critically, the armies raised to suppress the rebellion do not disband. The regional commanders who built them discovered that military power translates directly into political authority in a world where the central government can no longer project force. The consequences arrive with terrible speed. When Emperor Ying dies in 189, the court fractures over succession. The general-in-chief He Jin attempts to use the warlord Dong Zhuo's northwestern army to intimidate the eunuch faction. The eunuchs assassinate He Jin first. In the chaos, Dong Zhuo marches into Luoyang with his battle-hardened troops, deposes the young emperor, installs a child puppet, and seizes total control. When a coalition of regional warlords forms against him, Dong Zhuo forces the entire population of Luoyang to relocate westward to Chang'an. In 190, his soldiers put the eastern capital to the torch. The palaces that took generations to build, the archives, the libraries, the stone classics standing at the Imperial Academy, all of it burns. The flames are visible for days. What remains is not an empire, but a patchwork of armed territories. Yuan Shao dominates the northeast. Cao Cao consolidates the central plains. Sun Jian's heirs control the Yangtze. Liu Bei wanders with his small retinue, seeking a foothold. The Han Emperor exists technically, but he commands nothing beyond the walls of whatever city his current protector occupies. The administrative machinery that once governed 50 million people has shattered into competing military fiefdoms. The Yellow Turban rebels sought a new heaven. What they helped bring about is something far more earthly, the age of the warlord, and the slow, irreversible dissolution of the dynasty that gave its name to a people. Among the warlords who carve the empire into fiefdoms, one possesses a gift the others lack, not merely military brilliance, but administrative vision. Cao Cao, the son of a eunuch's adopted heir, understands that controlling the emperor matters more than controlling territory alone. In 196 of the Common Era, he locates the wandering Emperor Jian, starving, sheltering in the ruins of Luoyang, surrounded by a court reduced to foraging for wild grain among charred palace foundations, and escorts him eastward to the city of Shu, modern Xuchang in Henan. The move is calculated with surgical precision. Cao Cao now issues edicts in the emperor's name, commands the legitimacy of the Han throne, and brands every rival a rebel against imperial authority. The city of Shu transforms rapidly. New administrative offices rise along gridded streets. Displaced scholars, drawn by the promise of order, fill bureaucratic posts. Cao Cao implements a system of military agricultural colonies, settling soldiers on abandoned farmland to grow grain that feeds his expanding armies. The granaries fill. The population stabilizes. While other warlords burn through resources in endless skirmishes, Cao Cao builds. His greatest rival controls the vast northeastern plains. Yuan Shao commands the largest army in the former empire, an estimated 100,000 troops, and in the year 200 of the Common Era, he marches south to destroy Cao Cao's smaller force. The two armies meet at Guandu, along the Yellow River. Cao Cao's forces number perhaps 30,000. The standoff lasts months, supply lines stretching thin on both sides, until Cao Cao launches a daring raid on Yuan Shao's supply depot at Wuchao, burning the grain stores that sustain the northern army. The collapse is sudden and total. Yuan Shao's coalition fractures. Within years, Cao Cao absorbs the entire north, commanding everything from the Yellow River Basin to the Hebei frontier. By 208 of the Common Era, only the south remains unconquered. Cao Cao assembles a massive force. Later sources claim 800,000, though modern estimates suggest closer to 200,000, and advances down the Yangtze toward the territories held by Sun Quan in the east and Liu Bei in the middle reaches. The Allied southern commanders, led by the strategist Zhou Yu, recognize that Cao Cao's northern cavalry holds no advantage on water. At Red Cliffs, where the Yangtze narrows near modern Chibi in Hubei, fire ships laden with oil-soaked kindling drift into Cao Cao's chained fleet. The flames spread with terrifying speed. Warships burn to the waterline. Disease, already ravaging the northern troops unaccustomed to the humid southern climate, completes the destruction. Cao Cao retreats north. The dream of reunification dies on the river. The empire settles into a tripartite equilibrium. Cao Cao dominates the north from his base at Ye. Sun Quan consolidates the Yangtze Delta and the southeast. Liu Bei, claiming descent from the Han imperial house, establishes himself in the Sichuan basin. Emperor Xian remains at Shu, performing rituals, issuing decrees that no one beyond the palace walls obeys. The throne has become pure symbol, emptied of every function except the conferral of legitimacy upon the man who controls it. Cao Cao never formally claims the title of emperor. He accepts the rank of King of Wei in 216, but the final step remains untaken when he dies in the spring of 220 at the age of 65. His son Cao Pi harbors no such restraint. Within months, the machinery of abdication is set in motion. Confucian precedent demands the appearance of voluntary transfer, the mythic model of Yao yielding to Shun. Emperor Xian performs the ritual 3 times, declining to abdicate, before accepting on the 3rd request as protocol requires. On the 11th day of the 12th month of 220 of the Common Era, the last Han emperor descends from the altar at Shu and Cao Pi ascends as the first emperor of the Wei dynasty. 426 years of Han rule end not with a battle, but with a ceremony. Incense smoke rising into winter air, silk banners snapping in the cold, and the quiet transfer of a jade seal that once unified the world. The jade seal passes from hand to hand across the centuries that follow, but the civilization it once bound together proves far more durable than any single dynasty. The three kingdoms, Wei, Shu, and Wu, wage decades of war across the same landscapes the Han once governed, yet every warlord claims to restore Han legitimacy. Every court retains Han administrative structures, and every scholar writes in the clerical script that Han calligraphers perfected. When the Qin Dynasty briefly reunifies the realm in 280 of the Common Era, it inherits not merely territory, but an entire operating system of governance. The commandery and county hierarchy, the Confucian curriculum, the state monopolies on salt and iron, all designed under Han rule. The ethnic designation itself becomes permanent. The majority population of China begins calling itself Han people, Hanren, a name that endures through every subsequent dynasty, every foreign conquest, every revolution. By the 21st century, over 90% of China's population identifies as Hanzu. The Chinese script is called Hanzi, Han characters. The language itself is Hanyu. An empire that lasted 4 centuries becomes the permanent name of a civilization spanning millennia. Paper, refined by Kai Lun in 105 of the Common Era, begins its slow westward migration along the Silk Road. By the 5th century, papermaking reaches Samarkand. In 751, the Battle of Talas between Tang dynasty forces and the Abbasid Caliphate brings Chinese papermakers into Arab hands, and within decades Baghdad operates its own paper mills. By the 12th century, the technology reaches Europe, transforming scholarship, commerce, and eventually enabling the printing revolution that reshapes Western civilization. Every book, every letter, every legal document in the medieval and modern world traces its material foundation to a Han-era workshop, where bark and hemp fibers soaked in stone vats. The Silk Road's physical remains endure in the desert. At Dunhuang, the Mogao caves preserve centuries of Buddhist art, first inspired by the cultural exchange Han diplomacy initiated. At Lulan, sand-buried ruins mark the garrison outposts Zhang Qian's missions made necessary. The Gansu Corridor's 4 commanderies, Wuwei, Zhangye, Juquan, Dunhuang, remain populated cities 2,000 years after Emperor Wu established them. The intellectual architecture proves equally permanent. Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, completed around 94 before the Common Era, establishes the biographical analytic model that every subsequent Chinese dynastic history follows. 24 official histories spanning 3,000 years, all structured on the template one Han scholar created. Bangu's Book of Han, completed in 111 of the Common Era, refines this model further. Together, these works create the longest continuous historiographic tradition in human civilization. The Confucian meritocracy that Emperor Wu institutionalized in 124 before the Common Era, when he founded the Imperial Academy, evolves across subsequent dynasties into the civil service examination system. By the Tang and Song dynasties, these examinations become the primary pathway to political power, selecting officials through literary and philosophical competence rather than birth. The system endures until 1905, when the Qing Dynasty finally abolishes it, nearly 2,000 years after its Han origins. The modern concept of meritocratic civil service, adopted in various forms across East Asia and eventually influencing European administrative reform, carries the fingerprint of Han institutional design. In museum halls across the world, in Xi'an, Beijing, London, New York, terracotta warriors stand in climate-controlled silence. Jade burial suits gleam under careful lighting, and lacquerware vessels display brushwork that has not faded in 2 millennia. These are not relics of a vanished world. They are the material evidence of a civilization that never truly ended, one that embedded itself so deeply into the language, governance, identity, and technology of a quarter of humanity that its removal became inconceivable. The Han Dynasty did not merely rule an empire, it defined what it meant to be Chinese, and that definition, written in Han characters on paper the Han invented, governed by principles the Han codified, has outlasted every dynasty that followed. Thank you for joining this journey through one of history's most extraordinary civilizations. If these stories have brought the ancient world a little closer, consider subscribing so future explorations find their way to you as well.